So, James Stone, he is the president of NorCal Guides and Sportsmen Association. He's the author and the owner of the EliteSportsmen.com, and that's a premier hunting and fishing guide service company, and it's located here in the heart of California. He's going to speak on the economic impact of all the sand and sediment and garbage that got pushed down from the release of the water last year about this time, and how it's going to affect local businesses and what can be done to clean it up. So he's a guardian of one of our most precious natural resources here in the county, and he's an advocate as well. So I'd like to welcome Jim up and have him talk.
Appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Bill. As mentioned, my name is James Stone. I'm the owner-operator of Elite Sportsman Guide Service. I hailed here from the Bay Area originally and moved to Sacramento and graduated at Sac State and got my degree and said I wasn't far enough north and got to Marysville, Yuba City area, which I was fortunate enough to meet my wonderful bride, my wife, Sonia, and start a family and live in this wonderful area that I now get to call home for the past 12 years. I've hunted and fished in this area for well over 30 years with my grandfather visiting as tourist to your county, to Colusa County, Butte County, and others. And so now that this is my home, it really hits the heart. So I've got a lot of passion behind my directiveness towards local government officials, the state government, the federal government when I'm representing our organization and our citizens here locally discussing about the Feather River. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll kind of give you a basis on what's going on with our local river and the economical impact and kind of some solutions and what we've done so far. And I want to let you all know that there are people out there fighting for your publicly trusted resources that we are all entitled to have. We just wish that we maybe had a government that would take care of the things like they're supposed to. So on the history of the Feather River, it's approximately 67 miles long. It starts down at Verona, California, branches off the Sacramento River on a tributary, and it runs 67 miles all the way to the dam. About 8 miles downstream from the dam, we have the Afterbay outlet hole, which is where the water comes down into the Afterbay, and then it gets back re-released into the Feather River, treating it and heating it up for farming purposes. And from that area down to the FERC boundary, we've got about another 8 miles, totaling about 16 miles of river that is under the control of the FERC boundary. And for those of you that know a little bit about FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they are the ones that issue the license to DWR to operate the dam. So the dam had an initial 50-year license, and that expired in 2007. And starting in 2007, the stakeholders, our community and others, and everyone who lived downstream said, wait a minute, we're not being represented, and so we need to have some insight, some input, and a lot of public comment to try to revamp the way that you need to control the river, dam operations, as well as the environmental impact and economical impact of the downstream communities. And so since 2007, there was a settlement agreement, but there was always a delay. And still currently today, 11 years after the settlement, there still has been no FERC relicensing issued on the Oroville Dam. So currently they're operating on a 1-year temporary license every single year. And so what that's caused is it's caused the Department of Water Resources, i.e. the state government, it's caused them not to want to invest anything into the system until they have their 50-year license. And so what they have been doing the past 11 years is, in my opinion, and many others who support what I'm about to say, it's irresponsible maintenance and irresponsible operations of the actual spillway and controlling the downstream effects. And the reason that I say that it's irresponsible is because I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not a flood management person. I don't study water for my job, except I study flows and I study lake levels as a fishing guide, and I can do simple math. And simple math told us on Tuesday afternoon that we were going to have a problem, and it was a big problem. My great-grandmother's on the grandmother's on the board with you guys, the Sutter Tea Party, and I evacuated her from her home on Wednesday, evacuated the rest of our family from Marysville and Yuba City on Wednesday, and brought them out to Sutter to stage them because I knew something bad was going to happen. And this was just me doing simple math. The inflow is 198,000. We're kicking out maximum 100,000. You simply do the math. We have 3.5 days and we're going to have a major issue. And most of my family all thought I was crazy. Oh, it's fine. Don't worry. It's fine. Even Grandma said, Grandma, I got to embarrass you a little bit. She said, well, honey, you weren't here in '55. The flood was horrible. And I said, Grandma, neither was the dam. And she goes, oh, yeah, it was bad back then, too. So, I think the community gets so just comfortable because, we've never had a catastrophe. And we've never had the issue that we responded to last year. But now as citizens in a community, we come together and realize that that was a major problem. And the evacuation was a major problem. And the fear for safety, and people lost lives up in the Oroville area. And I think around here people had medical issues because of the stress of trying to move your family out and move all your belongings. And it's a major problem. But the bottom line is that I wanted to give you a little history behind that, because ever since the dam was installed, Department of Water Resources, the California government, is responsible for the dam and all of the effects of the dam. And they're arguing that they're only responsible to the FERC boundary, which is the city of Gridley, basically the bridge that goes over at East Gridley Road. They're saying everything south of that, it's our problem. And so our county supervisors, as well as Butte County and Yuba, they all say, well, we don't get any funding to regulate the river besides normal standard levee management, and we don't have any responsibility inside the boundaries. The last 60 years, we have seen sediment come down a river, and I'm not going to dispute that a natural river doesn't have sediment come down, and it doesn't have debris and trees and branches and bushes, because it does. It moves through a natural system, and the water flows can rise rapidly into a flash flood, but they always, remember this, they always recede just gently. They never have a rapid drop, and I'll explain in a little bit what caused so many of the problems. But when you have humans controlling a lever that literally opens gates and closes gates with a 2-foot motion that can regulate up to 50,000 CFS flow with the push of a button or the pull of a lever, you can have catastrophic problems and failures downstream, as we did. Not just evacuating, not just the fear of the emergency spillway breaking, but we were having catastrophic environmental problems the entire time this was going on, and it was getting zero public outreach or outlook, because we were, most of us, in fear of our lives, evacuating family and so on and so forth, which comes first. But secondly, once we revisit and everyone's home, we have to revisit other areas that were affected. And so the high water years that I want to talk to you about in the history were 1986, 1997. How many of you remember those 2 years? 97 was one of the worst. We had 367,000 CFS going into Oroville, and we were pumping out 167,000 at that time, the absolute maximum that we could. 2006 was a big high water year on the Feather River, and then 2017. And in all of these 4 huge years of water, now there's been a lot of other years that we've had some higher flows, but in all of these huge events, all the way up until last year, the sediment has been building and building and building and building in our lower communities. And it's only affecting basically our lower communities, Live Oak down. And because when the water comes down with heavy turbidity, that sediment builds up, and when it backs up against another tributary, creek, river, outlet, pumping station, bypass, or hard 180-degree bend in the river, the water speed slows down the velocity, and that causes that sediment to settle in certain areas. And we'll talk about those problems. The last time the sediment has ever been cleaned up, in case anyone's wondering, is 1973. And that's when we actually were maintaining our river annually. And a lot of gentlemen have educated me back on the old days of when it was cleaned up. A sandbar formed, and they were in there cleaning it up before striper season. And they were getting it done because they respected their environment, and they respected the waterway and the fishery, because they knew how much this community relied on it for recreation as well as tourism visiting our county. 45 years later, we now have less freeboard on our levee systems. And freeboard is designed as basically, the way I like to explain that to everyone is, everyone here has made a cake. So I say take a mixing bowl and fill it up full of water. You have a certain amount of water, you can now pour it in a jug and see how much water you had. But now if I take your mixing bowl and I fill the bottom half of it full of sand, and now we add water to your mixing bowl, we obviously have less water. Pushes the water up, puts more pressure against the sides, because the wider the volume of water, the more pressure pushes against the sides. Now, this is something that you're never going to hear from flood management. This isn't something you're going to hear from people that are going to tell you the truth, because they don't want to go invest millions, if not billions and billions of dollars into the project to make this better. But obviously, common sense tells you that if you remove some of that sediment that has built up over the years, the river will now drop back down into its channel banks, meandering natural as it possibly can with a dam upstream, and it will actually cause a lot less erosion, and it will cause less sediment to be settling in the river bottoms. This isn't something I'm proposing that we do just one time and we're done. This is something that needs a real big clean out, and then after that we need a maintenance program, and that's been recommended by multiple people from DWR, from our local government officials, as well as Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, who is our local representative of this area. But what we're trying to do is trying to prevent that erosion, and we're trying to protect our publicly trusted resource. And I don't think that there's been enough of that. And I know there's some gentlemen and women in this community that have been fighting for it for many years. One of them's in this room, and that I personally know, and I know there's many others, and there might be more in this room that have fought for it in the past. But the bottom line is if we start looking at who's responsible, we have a government that is now saying, not us, over here. And we have communities saying, well, what do we do? Do we take it upon ourselves? Do we as citizens rise up and form coalitions and figure out ways to get it done? Our organization has push to do that, and we have formulated the plans to push forward as private citizens if our government fails us. And I wouldn't be surprised if our state government doesn't fail us. I can tell you that our local government, I am very proud to say that I've worked with a lot of our local government in our county and our assemblyman and our local senator on multiple issues when it comes to this. And we've been endorsed to keep pushing on these issues by them. And I would say Assemblyman Gallagher has been one of our biggest fans and has spent hundreds of hours with us trying to make this stronger. Since then, Assemblyman Gallagher has put me in charge of the Oroville Strong Coalition subcommittee, downstream effects, which there's 4 subcommittees to which we are working on to represent the citizens of the downstream communities in regards to Oroville Dam operation, the future sediment cleanup, and many other issues that affect all of us to make sure that this disastrous event never happens again, and hopefully we start cleaning up from some of this mess. The last thing I want to talk about is just put this in the back of your mind as well tonight. Water. We all drink it. We all need it. And some of us use it for our businesses. Some of us are farmers who use it for growing, for food, to feed people. And some of us use it for recreation. But the thing is that I think that a lot of people overlook is that water is free. It's free. And I say that a lot, and everyone looks at me, especially my ag friends, and they go, it ain't free. And I say, well, I understand that, as I pay for it too, for duck club water when we're flooding our rice fields for duck season. And you're right, it isn't free. But our districts and our state water contractors have negotiated rates with our state government on how much they will pay for the transportation of that water. So if there's 1 gallon or let's not talk gallons, let's use units because that's the correct terminology. If there's 10 units of water being shipped down here to Yuba City, and then the Yuba City district has to ship the water to your home, they're going to charge you a surcharge because they've got to pay DWR to open a gate like this. The water comes from Oroville down to Yuba City. It pumps into our city pumps, and then they pump it to your house through the main, and they treat it sometimes. Some districts treat differently than others. And after the water's treated, then it's coming to your house to have safe drinking water. And so that irrigation district pays the charge from Oroville down to Yuba City. And for an example that I can give you, which is one of the worst, is Oroville, city of Oroville. They pay roughly $62 to $66 per unit of water, per 10 units of water. Is it interesting to anybody in this room that Los Angeles pays $42 for the same amount of water? Now, when I started investigating these numbers and the terminology and figuring out, wait, they're paying less for water, yet we're shipping it hundreds of miles down to them, and we're right here in our local community, and we can't get water for less than $40 an acre? I mean, it's kind of interesting when you start looking at the numbers. And it's supply and demand, everyone. And if I was running DWR for gross profit, then yes, as a business owner, I understand economics. They're doing supply and demand. They're selling water by volume. You want to buy 1 million acre feet? I'll give it to you at this deal. You want to buy 300,000? I'll give it to you at this deal. Well, a small community like Oroville, Live Oak, Biggs, smaller communities, you don't need so much water, so you got to pay us a little bit more to open that valve a little bit. But it's really interesting when you start thinking about those economics and you start thinking about whose communities are really affected by all this water traveling down this system. Remember, the bigger government is Sacramento South. Remember that our state legislators, 70% have never been north of the Sacramento airport. That was told to me by our lobbyist when we toured the Capitol, and I'm like, really? He says, yeah, ask everyone I introduced you to today. And we introduced 14 people and asked everyone, and only 2 people said, yeah, I've been to Yuba City area before. I've been to Chico one time, had a beer there at the brewery, and I'm like, great, you know. But that's all they've experienced of our community, of Northern California, as I like to say. And it's interesting because our economics to them are small, just like our populations, just like our votes. They treat us as if we don't matter. And they keep shipping this water south every single year, year after year, and nothing gets done as long as the water's going south. Now, I don't want you to take me the wrong way. I'm not trying to take water away from anyone. I'm just trying to state that we need to be responsible in our water management and how we deliver water. That's the most important thing. So to talk a little bit about economics, the recreation here locally, we've polled, and there's about 20,000 people that locally use the river on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis, at least 4 times a year. Now think about that. 20,000 people utilizing the Feather River 4 times a year. So that's 80,000 trips. That's a lot of gas. That's a lot of money when you start adding those types of numbers up. When you start looking at the tourism, what got me here? Why am I here in front of you speaking tonight? It's because that there was a wonderful Feather River that I always got to come up here with my grandfather and uncle and catch salmon in, which as a young boy in elementary school, not much older than my son, got to see how wonderful and beautiful of a place this was. And it drew me. It pulled me. And my heart is on that river. My heart is on the Sacramento River, because those are the places that I grew up on and I loved and now I live in. And I will fight to make sure that those areas get cleaned up, because they don't deserve to be treated like that, and now it's affecting our pocketbooks, especially as a full-time fishing guide. That's what I do to feed my family. I take people fishing. I call myself a glorified babysitter. As long as you can reel, you can catch fish. That's all you got to do is turn the handle. But I do it because it's my passion. It's what I love. And I love to take people out. I love to watch people watch their kids catch fish. I've watched kids grow up on my boat from 5, 6, 7, 8 years old all the way into adults. I've got some teenagers that started with me and now are adults and have kids of their own that fish with me on my boat. And it's one of the most gratifying experiences in the world. It's something that's special that we get to share. Fishing goes all the way back to biblical times. It's something that we used to do as a human race all the time and relied on. It's one thing that we can all come together on when it comes to fishing. I encourage you to try it more often and fish with your families. Even if you're in the later years of your life or the early years of your life, I encourage you to get back out there and remember how wonderful it is to fish. There's a lot of things that are affecting the orchards and the farmers up north that lost lands on the economical impacts. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in acreage. I've spoke with 4 or 5 of the main farmers that have lost hundreds of trees, walnut trees, almond trees. We've lost hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of riparian cottonwoods and other types of riparian along the rivers, pretty much from Yuba City all the way to Live Oak. The entire banks are collapsed. We're talking tree lines that are 80, 120 years old on average, according to biologists, that are completely destroyed, uprooted, and in the river. And they said they're not going to do anything about it. So my son's got to grow up, and he's got to fish on a bare river with no beautiful scenery, with no wildlife. There's lots of wildlife that uses that area. Bald eagles, osprey, many different types of deer, other animals. And we've got to get those areas cleaned up. The areas of riparian that weren't lost affected all of these farmers, these tree farmers. And with them, bait shops, boating shops, sporting goods stores, fishing guides, hunting guides, and many other citizens here, we all filed claims against DWR. And Department of General Services looked at all of the claims, $1.3 billion in claims of actual loss, of actual economic loss to our communities. And they denied every single claim. 100% of the claims. Not one person got paid. I was in Willows the day it happened, the Sunday, and I had to do 90 miles an hour to try to run home. And when I got home, I felt like I was going the wrong way because everyone was going to Colusa, and I was the only car coming back into town. And it's really something to see from that angle when you're going back into it. And it wasn't good. But all of those claims is from all the money that was lost from all of these businesses and people and fishing and hunting guides. It also affects all the restaurants. It affected all the hotels, the local businesses, citizens, senior citizens, anyone that had to move immediately, the hospitals, and an unknown amount of money in gas and food and supplies. But something that I can give you an economical impact and that we're pretty solid on our numbers is based on our NCGASA membership. If you looked at the average number of full-time guides, we have not been able to access the river since October 15th, as of today. We cannot launch our boats on the river. There's nowhere to go. There's too much sediment. There's not enough flow. Until that flow gets over 5,000, we can't go fishing. We can't work. And there's a huge economical impact on that, and I'm going to explain to you what that is. Based on very conservative numbers, the average full-time guide has lost out on about 1,600 total clients, and about the average part-time guide that works on the weekends that has other jobs Monday through Friday lost out on about 1,000 clients, and that's based on every single month. A total of 2,600 clientele that aren't able to go fishing on the river because we have too much sediment. If you divide the numbers and look on the historical average, we're seeing about 52 to 53% of those people are coming from out of town, just like me. They're visiting from the Bay Area. They're flying in from LA. They're flying in on their private jets into Yuba Airport. They're coming in to go see the wonderful Feather River, to fish on the wonderful Feather River that their grandfather fished on. And they can't do it anymore. We can't fish. So there's a problem with that. When you look at the 53% that comes in from out of town, and you look at an occupancy rate of 2 people in every single room and say that only 800 of those people, which is your 53%, that's 800 rooms over the month. That's 1,600 meals, dinner, and lunch before they leave, and more than likely a fill-up of their fuel to leave our town. If you do an average mean, the average right around gets to about $210 per client that comes out. And when you look at the total economical impact, we're over $250,000 a month. And that's just the small guide community for fishing. That doesn't cover all of the locals. That doesn't cover all the friends that come to visit with the locals that say, come fish with me. That's just one little small industry that we're losing. That doesn't count our fees of what we charge. That's just the economical impact on Sutter County. We're losing over $250,000 every single month. And now, in a big city, they're not going to think that that's that much money. But here, it does mean a lot to all these small businesses. I love when my clients tell me that they stop and they walked around Plymouth Street and went shopping at our local shops and spent money in our community because it's important. And if we'd ever stop valuing our tourism, Sutter County will end up being lost, because Sutter County's tourism is from our rivers. The buttes draw some people and bird watching, but the rivers draw a lot of people. So in the Sutter Buttes community, we have some things that a lot of people don't know, and I want to kind of talk about that. And that's that our government, our state, is required to maintain the waterway. And a lot of people say, well, what do you mean it's designed to maintain the waterway? Well, they have to maintain it because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers states under the Federal Register that the Feather River is completely navigable all the way until Shanghai Falls. And if it is considered a navigable river, then the federal government pushes money down to the state pushes money to the local counties, and then the counties are responsible to use that money on those waterways. And something that's interesting is that we're not seeing as much money being spent on our waterways. The sheriff gets money. That money is designed to buy boats. They have boats. And it's designed to pay for the salary of a deputy to be on the boat to patrol the waterways for our public safety. And I can tell you from experience, we rarely see the boat sheriff on the waterways. He's a great man. I know him great. And I call and say, hey, where are you? There was a boating accident out here. Oh, I can't go out today because my sergeant pulled me off the beat because we're shorthanded and I have to run a patrol. So we don't have people out there to help us. And so we've relied on ourselves for many years. Also, right now, the sheriff can't launch. He can't get his boat in the river. There's too much sand. His boat's just as big as mine. He can't get in there. So if somebody gets hurt right now because they privately launch on a private land and they go in and they start floating down the river and get hurt, don't you think that's a problem that our sheriff can't get to them? Don't you think it's a problem that our fire department can't get to people? That waterway is supposed to be fully navigable year-round. There's nowhere in there it says if the flows are under this, then the water is unnavigable. But we can't access the river, and that's a problem. Our community needs to rise up and get together and make sure that we can get this sediment cleaned up once and for all so that we can allow our fire and police to do their job and allow our people to recreate and allow our fishing guides to go to work. The fire and police can't access all the locations that they're supposed to protect. And under the California Constitution, they're required to. So I would think that requires them to clean out the boat ramps at the very minimum, at the absolute minimum. All boat ramps should be cleaned out so that the sheriff and our law enforcement and our fire can get on the waterways. And I've reached out to all of them, and I've received a lot of support on that issue and agreement. But yet, politically, it's a very tough topic to touch. I'll leave it at that tonight. The boat ramps are full of sand. There's low maintenance. There's sandbars all over the place that leave tough navigation. It leaves that when we have low flows, we have major problems. Our organization has spent thousands of dollars. We're a nonprofit. I don't get paid to do my nonprofit presidency of NorCal Guides and Sportsmen's Association. I do it out of the goodness of my heart. I was nominated to take over the organization. We've been around 45 years, and I was nominated by two of the most veteran guides in our river system, one from the late Jimmy Zanocco, and two from Mr. Bob Wiggum up in Redding. And my job was to make the public aware of what's really going on, because I think we know what's going on when we drive over the 5th or 10th Street Bridge and we go, man, the river's low. Man, look at all that sand. We drive down to Sacramento and we see the 99 Nicholas Bridge. How many of you have seen how bad it is down there? Sediment's horrible down there. Well, we've spent the thousands of dollars. We've toured our assemblymen around. We've toured our senators around. We have invited the new governor, possible-elect Travis Allen, who's coming to speak with you guys. We've invited him to come and look. We've had a lot of people come look at the river. We've done boat tours with our local boards of supervisors, city officials, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Water Resources, state water contractors, and many, many others. And we've had a lot of people on our boat. And I'm going to share with you some of the solutions that we've done. But we used to do boat tours, and we did boat tours all the way until October 15th. And people were calling, hey, we want to see it. We want to see the problems. And we couldn't show it to them because we couldn't get there. So we started hiring locals, and we threw a big fundraising dinner and raised some money, and we started hiring local pilots to fly. And at this time, I'm going to share some photos with you guys. These are the most recent. And I'll start here and let them kind of pass around. No, they're all different. And they're all titled and tell you where the locations are. And these locations, we flew over the top most recently on 2/28. And I had a gentleman, Shasta County Sheriff, volunteer his time to take these photos out of the plane out of Marysville Airport. And then I was down below in an actual airboat, like one you see from the Everglades in Florida. A gentleman, friend of mine up in Willows owns it, and we took it out on the Feather River on this date, on February 28th last week. And it was the only way to get across the sandbars, because we hit sandbars about every 300 yards. I mean, it's insane about how much sand is out there. So solutions. You know, what are we going to do? Now, there's a word that a lot of us, we don't ever try not to use it, but I'm going to use it in the room just so you know what the word is. And the word's the D word. It's called dredge. We don't like to use that word because it pulls out the environmentalist of freaking out about what's going on with the river. Well, I can tell you if they really cared about it, then they would understand and get up here and agree with us. Oh, yeah, that's choking off all of the natural vegetation. It's killing our fishery. It's killing our flow. And it's affecting our personal recreation as outdoorsmen and as citizens of this county. In 2007, all the way until about 2010, Department of Water Resources collectively worked with a coalition of folks, including our Board of Supervisors, Butte County, Yuba County, Sutter County, and I believe, and Stan Cleveland, who's in the room, was one of these people. And I believe you were a Board of Supervisor at the time. So Stan was representing the county before he was on city council in Yuba City. And all of these people are very smart and intelligent people. And this program is 314 pages. And it's called the Lower Feather River Corridor Management Plan, the LFR-CMP. And this program wasn't even published until 2014. So it was a programmable approach of a way for counties and Department of Water Resources to improve the health of the river and improve access to the river, to basically promote recreational activities while still preserving levees and safety and flood protection for all. They even tied it to Proposition 1, which we all voted in. And they even subsectioned under Proposition 1E that monies was supposed to be individually distributed to perform certain duties in the Lower Feather River Corridor Management Plan. Under investigation, and I professionally humiliated the DWR staff at the first town hall we had and said, "Do you even know what this is?" And they all looked at me like, I've got no clue. None of them knew what the LFRMCP was. And they all looked at us, and one guy goes, "Well, the Lower Feather River Corridor Management Plan." And we said, "Yes." "Do you know what it says?" No clue. This is our government agency, our state government. We're paying these people to run the most massive water system in the state. It's the State Water Project, everybody. That's the State Water Project. And we are managing them to do it, and they don't even know what their own documentation says. They spent millions of dollars producing this document, and a lot of people spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours to volunteer their time to make this better for our communities. And so in that document, it quoted that we needed to remove 3.7 million cubic yards of sediment at a minimum. It said that we were going to replace 1.2 in certain areas and completely remove 2.5 million out of the river. To give you more of a better idea of how much a million cubic yards is, I've called the owner of Dutra Group, Mr. Dutra, and he said he was the one that had the contract up at the diversion pool to dredge out the river. He was actually dredging, so I'm going to use that word. He was using a mechanical dredge, and they were scooping it out of the ground with a claw bucket and dropping it on a barge, and then taking the barge over to the edge and then craning it into trucks and driving it away. And they, at that time, said we were going to remove that much sediment. And that was all the way until 2007. No records were kept from 2007 all the way until 2017. But if you just take an average and you divide the 3.7 million into 45 years, and then you add another 10 years, you could figure it's roughly 25%, which states between 7 and 17, about another million cubic yards. So about every 10 years, million cubic yards every 10 years. And that includes the one high flow event that we get about every 10 years, 86, 97, 2006, 2017. All's making sense. Everything's lining up number-wise. The problem is they never counted on the Oroville spillway crisis. They never counted on 1.7 to 1.8 million cubic yards of earth to completely come down off of that mountain and fall into the diversion pool and fall into the Feather River. Then they contracted Dutra Group out. It's taken 3 FOIA requests from our organization. FOIA is FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And that's when you're requesting a public document from your government. They write your name down. They do an investigation on who you are. And then they decide whether or not they will release that document or they won't. And it took a little over 3 months, and we finally got the contract. Just the contract. That's all we wanted. If you go to Yuba City and say, "How much did you pay for the firefighter engine?" they will release that information to you. That's public information. How much did the county pay for homeless? They will release that information to you. That is public information. Yet we had to file a FOIA request for our own state government to tell us how much they were spending to clean out the pool. We received the original document, and the original contract called for about $11 million to clean out the one diversion pool at the bottom of the spillway. That was 4 months of work, constantly 24 hours a day, and the contract read to remove 575,000 cubic yards of sediment, $10 million. Upon further investigation, we've now concluded with another contract that was an extended contract that we were not aware of, that we had to file for an additional FOIA request, and other agencies and other companies telling us that they were in there before the Dutra Group got that contract, that number is realistically sitting right now at about $36 million to clean out the diversion pool. Just the diversion pool. Now, where were all the environmentalists? Where were everybody screaming and yelling that we're hurting the river? Nobody. Nobody said anything. They went in there with 4 to 5 months of work. They cleaned out all the concrete. They cleaned out a little sediment and dug the hole back to where it needed to be. 575,000 cubic yards, millions and millions of dollars, and they didn't touch one area in our community where we are affected. NorCal Guides and Sportsmen Association has reached out to the local, state governments, as well as the federal government, Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, City of Yuba City, Sutter County Board of Supervisors, the Assembly, the Senate, DWR, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and FEMA. And we've tried to declare that this is a disaster. And many people have agreed with us, and some in the community have not. But now, with the 1.7 million cubic yards being fallen off of that hillside, them only doing 575,000 of cleanup, that leaves 1.2 million cubic yards of earth downstream in our community. On top of that, all of the irresponsible flows, which were when DWR was flowing at 100,000 at the peak level, they should have left it there. And they should have drained the lake all the way down to 820 to give them a better cushion. 850 is their technical cushion for spring runoff. They should have ran it down to 820, and they didn't. And then they had the problems. And so once they had to inspect the spillway in the middle of the flow, somebody grabbed the lever and said 100,000, 50,000. Right now. There was no stair-step drop down. For anybody that knows anything about sediment and soil and saturation, sand and sediment is weakest and heaviest when it has water in it. So as the water fills the river and pushes against the banks, filling the banks and flowing into our farmlands, all of the bank is heavy and full of water, heavily saturated. And then you drop the flows out 9 feet vertical in this case, 9 feet, 100,000, 50,000 right now, and all of those banks collapsed. Mr. Foster, Mr. Filter, and many other Jim Farms and many others up the Feather River Canyon started having banks collapse into the river, trees collapse into the river, hundreds of trees. We don't even have a full count yet. Over 100 and something acres of land gone. You do that math. Now you've got another 1.5 million cubic yards of sediment this year. So now you've got 2.7 million cubic yards of sediment in one event. And remember, the LFR CMP calls for 3.7 million. So now realistically today, 2018, where are we looking? We're looking at 5 to 6 and probably even more sediment that needs to be removed from Yuba City down to Verona, 28 miles of river, the lower 28. Everywhere that these areas need to be dug out have been identified. We've taken USGS maps, topographical maps, and geological maps, and we have surveyed these areas. We've documented the changes of these areas, all on our own time, all on our own dollar, and we've called them the 33 hot spots. And of these places identified, we've had confirmation from our state government that they agree with us that these areas are heavily changed and heavily silted in. Our senator and our local Senator Nielsen and Assemblyman Gallagher have both approved our 33 hot spots and agree and have petitioned to have them cleaned up. The cost is in the millions. We don't know where we're going to get the funding to do it, but we're going to find it. Is it going to come from the government? Is it going to come from your tax dollars? Is it going to come from private entities? Is it going to come from donations? Is it going to come from the state water contractors? Is it going to come from them? Or is it going to come from some other form or some other source? So what we've been doing is we've been trying to find ways that we can find avenues of revenue so that we can try to help our local government get it done. Coming back and starting from the basics. And the basis is community. You start with your community and you pool together and you stick together. And by doing so, we're stronger because we're not just one. We're not just one city. We're not just one person. We're now a community. We're now counties. We're now a downstream community. When we're represented through our coalitions, we're now 188,000 strong because we're all affected from what happened in February last year. So what we've done is we've tried to find ways to find funding, working with people. One of the first things that Assemblyman Gallagher tried to do is he tried to get some money for us put aside in Senate Bill number 5. Senate Bill 5 is now turned into Proposition 68. It's going to be on your June ballot, and it's a water bond. And I, like you, don't feel that I need to pay more taxes than I need to. I like to pay as little tax as I can. I'm always happy to pay my tax to support my veterans and my military. And I'm happy to pay for my taxes to give me nice clean roads, airports, public safety, and so many other things that we all enjoy having. But the problem is most of us don't enjoy paying extra taxes when we don't know where the money's going, i.e. our gas tax, i.e. some of our other things. My registration went up $200 this year. That's interesting. I wonder where that money's going. But we've been earmarked in Senate Bill 5 to have $200 million go towards the restoration for fisheries and waterways. And in this $200 million, we've earmarked some money for sediment management for the Feather River. It's roughly about $10 million. So if you do choose in June to support Proposition 68, let yourself know that there's a lot of money that will actually help our local community in Proposition 68. That money will go towards the sediment removal. There's also some money to go in there for fisheries, habitat for salmon and steelhead, recreation, boat launches, and many other things for all of our communities to access our waters. Our organization then furthermore decided to work with Jerry Merrill. And Jerry Merrill came up with an individual water bond that was supported by Ducks Unlimited and a few other southern water contractors. And in that Merrill bond, which is going to be on the ballot in November, we actually specifically earmarked in that water bond $15 million for the Feather River cleanup outside of Yuba City, California, to be allocated for the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency. So if the Merrill bond passes in November, $15 million will go right to Mike at Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, and they will start utilizing that money to start cleaning up our waterways. So that was our backup plan. From there, we also added $6 million for habitat so that we could work on the environment. I was always told growing up as an outdoorsman, the conservatives didn't care about the environment. Only the left cared about the environment. And I find it awfully funny how when I reached out to many people across the aisle to receive bipartisanship at the Capitol this past year, working on my own time, I've found very little support about people who care about the environment. The people that really care about the environment are us, you, because you're here. You wanted to donate your time to listen to me talk about it. People like me that have spent thousands of hours away from my family so that I could fight for the community and fight for what's right to get this situation cleaned up. So that $6 million of that habitat on the Merrill Bond will go towards riparian to replant the trees. So hopefully my kids and grandkids will one day see beautiful scenery as they get to fish the Feather River. And it will also go towards some salmon and steelhead improvement areas so that we can once again hopefully get historic runs of salmon like we used to in the 60s and 70s and 80s. We also have $2 million allocated in the Merrill Bond for hatchery production to ramp up the hatcheries so that we can get more fish for our communities. For those of you that don't know, our salmon industry is completely collapsing. It has been on the collapse for the past 15 years, and the site it's really bad right now, and we're looking at possible closure this year. We're at the lowest numbers this past year on the Sacramento. We actually had a good return on the Feather last year, but on the Sacramento we had a really poor return, and we're looking at a bad system. The nice thing is that we've put so much pressure politically and professionally on the state water contractors that the state water contractors have looked at us. They've toured on our boats. I had the head gentleman, Randy Record from Metropolitan Water District, the largest user representing 19 million of the Californians that use water in his area in Los Angeles. He was on my boat. He had never been up here. He got to see the river, and you could read his face. His face showed that he cared, but you could tell that his brain was turning on how much is this going to cost to clean up. And himself and other state water contractors have been working with our lobbyist and have at this point verbally agreed to match any funding that we get from Proposition 68, Senate Bill 5. So if Prop 68 passes, we anticipate at this point our state water contractors, which are going to be San Diego, Metropolitan, Westlands, and Kern County, who take about 58% of the water that gets shipped down the Feather River. 58% goes to those 4 contractors. They take 58% of the lake every year, so if you watch the lake drop, know that that much water goes to those 4 entities. But those 4 entities have decided that they will pony up some money to help us clean up our river system. We worked awfully hard to get all of those people to our community to show them what was happening and how our system is sick and it needs to be nurtured, cleaned up, and overhauled so that the next generations can enjoy it. The economical impact from this has not only affected my business, it's not only hurt my family, it's not only hurt the local farmers, it's not only hurt the local citizens and recreation and stores, and to reiterate, our gas stations, our restaurants, our hotels. It's affected all of us, and we need to do something about it. In conclusion, our publicly trusted resources are the most important things that we have left in California, and we need to protect them. We, the people, pay taxes to trust our elected officials to solve these problems, including our local sheriff. We need to vote to connect these leaders, to put them in power to make the changes to protect our Sutter Buttes community economy, jobs, and recreation. Thank you very much for your time tonight. You can take any questions if you'd like to ask any questions at this time. I will try to answer them to best of my knowledge. I also brought some cards and stickers that I'll put in the back, And for Bill, I brought you 4 t-shirts to give to the best 4 questions that you thought from our organization. And if anyone wants to support us, NorCal Guides and Sportsmen Association, I'll give the flyers out. The memberships are very inexpensive. They're $20 a year for the average sportsman, $50 for guides. You can come to our public meetings. Our next public meeting is March 11th, this Sunday. Sir? Great question. We've inquired. I don't have the specific date. What I'm being told right now is 67 or 68, and that's when the Princeton Ferry was still operating and running. And I think it ran all the way until the 80s. Yeah.
If you're going to ask questions, please come up to the mic, or I'll bring it to you. Otherwise, they don't get heard on YouTube.
The question was, why did they stop dredging?
Yeah,
thank you. And the best answer that I can give you right now is based on California's environmental policies and the Clean Water Act. They are claiming, and this is people that are sitting in an office, that because of the hydraulic mining days when the gold mining was being done, there was the use of a lot of mercury, and so they claim there's a lot of mercury underneath our soil, and if we start digging down into the ground, that we're going to hit that mercury from those days. But we have biologists and we have researchers that are telling us complete opposites, that is so far down deep that we would never even touch or affect any of those areas. And there's also other different types of techniques for silt management, such as suction, such as dry removal. A lot of the sand can actually be removed with trucks and tractors. We don't even need to go into the river. We just need to go inside the banks to actually remove some of that sediment in the areas, so that when the flows do reach, that they'll stay inside of those banks. It will also keep that river from coming out of the floodplain, pushing against our levees, and will save us and give us that freeboard that we're looking for. But the only reason that I can give you right now that I've heard is because of environmental reasons. Plus, I would say that there's not a lot of economical value to them anymore, because our canneries are gone for salmon, and our boats are not shipping up here as they used to. Down below Boyd's Pump, we still have the old pylons from the old days when they used to bring the ship up to ship rice out. And we still have those pilings in the center of the river. Question, sir?
Why doesn't somebody call them on that lie about the mercury in there? Because those rivers were dredged every year for many, many years. I have a pilot's guide from the 1940s that shows minimum water level to Calusa is 4 feet. Minimum. So like you were saying, the boats used to go up there all the time. The other thing is, 15 years ago with the salmon, wasn't that caused by LA getting cut off from the Colorado River and this water up here going south, so we don't have cold water at the end of the summer for the salmon? And they keep talking about all kind of other stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your thing, I agree. Yes, by cleaning out the rivers, you are basically maintaining your own system. So we always like to use the analogy of how many of you clean your septic at your house every 10 years? Have it pumped, right? How many of you clean out your pipes? How many of you change your oil on your car? Okay? It's called maintenance, ladies and gentlemen, and we have to do maintenance to all different things that have been affected by humans. We changed the Feather River by adding the dam. We are now responsible to maintain the areas that can't have nature help itself. We have to give it a helping hand, and that is what we can do to help it, is clean that section out.
So the dredging word is, I don't think it's a nasty word in this group. And the environmentalists are going to be the only advocates against doing that. What's the most effective way to combat those people or those groups?
That's a great question. And I would say that Stan Cleveland is less smiling at me because we faced this, and that is to not use the D word. It honestly is, and it's hard for me because it's a common word, and it's a technique that would work. So we're trying to use the word silt management because it seems to, I hate to say politically correct, but it seems to be the frosting on top of the cake that they are willing to swallow, calling it silt management. And if I feed it to them and calling it dredging, they're, oh, no, that's bad. So, but when we call it silt management, and I walk into the bipartisanship in the Capitol, they say, oh, well, come on and talk to me. What's silt management? It's amazing about I don't want to use the word ignorance, but basically about what people know about hydrology of watersheds. Sir.
Have they looked into any way of remarketing the silt or replenishing upstream of this erosion? Is there any use of the silt?
Great question. I would say yes. There is many uses. Assemblyman Gallagher was reached out by the citizens of Pacifica because they're actually falling into the ocean and they need sand and silt and sediment to build erosion walls to protect them against rising sea levels. And so they have reached out and said that we could use it there. We also said, what about replenishing it? Sorry, sir, I'm trying to see you. Nope. We have also said about replenishing it as far as up in the Oroville area. We can rebuild banks and sediment in areas that we don't want to erode and use riprap and use this sediment to build it up, and then areas that we want the river to go outside the banks into the floodplain to help species of fish and everything grow in the floodplain and then slowly be able to get out and market it that way. We've got 2 companies locally that have said that they're willing to take some of the sediment, but when we start talking numbers and you tell them, yeah, we've got like 5-6 million cubic yards, they go, whoa, because 1 million cubic yards fills an entire football stadium. So we're talking 6 football stadiums full of sand. That's what we need to get out. And that could be an underestimate, actually, and that's what we're scared about.
Where are they putting the current rocks, what they're dredging out of the pool from the spillway?
So they're taking them out of the river and they're hauling them to a dump site. And the permitting that you normally have required to do any work inside of the banks of the river system anywhere that is controlled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you need to get a 401 and a 404 permit. At the first DWR town hall meeting, I asked them to produce those 2 permits, and they could not produce them. And I said, then you're operating illegally inside the watershed. And then they claimed to use their RG8 permit, which is a emergency standard permit, which is issued over a 5-year span by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then the department uses that over a 5-year cycle over emergency situations. So they used that permit to do it into the emergency situation. And I can tell you that the turbidity coming down was noticed because we were all fishing salmon, and our fall run of salmon were coming up as they were cleaning that all out. So we did notice turbidity coming down the river, but we didn't notice anything harmful that was affecting the river system.
Well, going up to Paradise on Clark Road, I mean, they took the hairpin turn out of the bottom of that coming out of Clark before it goes straight into where Butte College is. And they filled this whole, it was a pretty good size canyon right there, and they put the highway straight across there. They've cut the corner out. And I don't know where they're getting all that dirt, but that was like a football stadium right there. And one other question, who is responsible for the funds? I mean, who's in charge of the funding as far as the profits from the water release? And also, you know, that seems pretty lucrative. They've also raised our property taxes to cover DWR. And where's that funding going?
I can't give you a 100% answer, but my guess is going to say the general fund. And that's because we are seeing a surplus with DWR, with their state water contractors every year. And people want to know how big water is. And remember, I reminded you the water was free, but it's actually a $46 billion with a B dollar industry every year in California. It is the lifeblood. It has turned into a commodity, and they are utilizing it more and more and more with our population growth. Remember, we built the 2 reservoirs. The Shasta was built on the federal side to operate the CVPIA, the California Valley Improvement Act, and that was the federal system that originally was going to be the lifeline and the veins of the Sacramento River for all of the farmers of the Sacramento River Valley. And there was stakeholders and people that homestead that have their water rights up and down that valley. That's why that system settled after the dam was put in. Then when they added the Feather River and Folsom, those 2 became state water projects. And the state decided to put their hand in the water game. And they wanted to operate the state water projects to fill the voids of where the CVPIA couldn't deliver. And so they had water users. Everyone wants water. And as the population has now doubled since when we built the dams, and there's a lot more southern ag going on and users, there's a lot of people that need water. So it's supply and demand, basically. And we don't have the supply, so that's why a lot of people are in favor of more reservoirs and building more water storage so that there's more for everybody.
But there's no breakdown for the $46 billion they're taking.
Yes, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they're charging all of that money. DWR is charging all that money to the citizens, to the water districts, to the farmers, to everybody. We're all paying all of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have a statement. It's also a scam and a ripoff on the public. One of my customers in Bakersfield, Oildale area was the Oildale Water Company, and the rates were reasonable. And then somebody within power decided on up the line to stick another building up there so the water would come through there and then down. Then they charged Oildale Water Company a ridiculous fee, and the water went sky high. And the Oildale Water Company was about the size of a ranch house with a small yard. You go to the new building and it's all marble. It's so huge, it's just cavernous, cathedral ceilings and everything, and the place is empty. But they're making all this damn money just by just sticking in there to letting the water run through them down to Oildale. So it's just all this manipulation and everything with water. So it's just a statement.
My statement back would be what my grandfather taught me. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I'm just thinking, I'm really not from this area, but environmentalists have shut down the dredging. They don't want that going on. I'm learning a little bit of gold prospecting, mining. Have you thought to kind of reach out to some of the small mining groups? And California apparently, I guess they prohibited suction dredging for small miners several years ago. Something's going on. They say, okay, well, it can be done, but you have to get a permit, but they won't issue any permits. So I'm thinking if you took, say, you got 33 hotspots on the Feather River, if you could convince the state to take 5 of those and run an experiment, provide permits for small miners to get in there with their suction dredges and do what they can. Their tailings would have to go onto a barge or something like that. Make it a cooperative effort, and then see if those 5 areas can be cleaned up really without a lot of taxpayer money going into it, without a lot of government involvement, and get the mining community, the small mining community with suction dredgers out there to work, because they care about these rivers as much as fishermen do and as much as everybody else does.
Thank you for your comments. Stan, I'm going to let Stan address that because I remember he had some comments about that, and I'll let him go ahead.
Well, I spent 3 years of my supervisor life down in Sacramento periodically to work on the Lower Feather River Corridor Management Plan. And the sedimentation management and removal, which to me is the definition of dredging, but it includes all forms of dredging, which includes dry removal and channel removal. And so that got great cooperation from the environmental NGOs to say that's a good idea, because it does cover the whole thing, and they have a little bit of say in the process. So they totally agreed upon that, and we got them going with that. And the other thing that I want to mention is that to get them also on board, to even get that included, I said, if we're going to go back in history to what it used to be in the riverways, we used to not have levees. So let's pretend there's no levees there. And where did the sedimentation go when there were no levees? It went out over all the land and flooded everything, and it deposited the sediment all over the place in the valley. And it didn't go down the river, it went over the valley and dissipated and didn't send it down to Sacramento. So I said, well then, wouldn't it be right for us to remove this sedimentation where nature used to remove it itself in its natural way? So since we have levees, it can't do that. We need to assist nature and do it correctly at where it used to deposit it over our valley. And they said, you know what, you're right. So they agreed upon that. And that's how this plan actually included some of these things. So those were two ideas that I came up with, which I couldn't figure out how in the world they didn't come up with them all these years and figure it out. Took a simple person like me. But when we're dealing with trying to do the dredging and actually in the channel, that does freak out just about everybody. But it does not prohibit it. Those ideas have been thought of. They were part of the discussion. It's maybe not be in the document, but it's part of the recorded discussions that we had in the meetings at a company called AECOM in Sacramento, very large company on these types of documentary processes and contractors to figure these things out. There were 23 separate government and NGO agencies that were represented in this, from NOAA to Corps to DWR to the national. I mean, it was just in our local environmental and NGOs. Very great. It was a fantastic group it turned out to be. We worked very well together. All those options are open in this Lower Feather River Corridor Management Plan. But it's a programmatic, project-oriented to where we have to find somebody or partners that'll plan. It'll take 2 or 3 years just to plan out to do something so that nobody gets their feelings hurt and everybody crosses the T's, dots the I, but it's worth the time to get it done to make that happen. Because then if you do get a good program going, as James has said, it's not a one-year thing. It's an ongoing thing. And every 5 years, this plan is supposed to be reviewed. Hasn't been reviewed yet. It's time to. But some of the people were probably not wanting it to ever go into to actually acted upon. But this Oroville incident has forced it to the surface. And if we push hard enough and long enough, and get the right people together, it will be able to be enacted upon. Excuse me. It's also the pilot program for the rest of the state of California. This was a pilot that is supposed to be able to be applied to every meandering stream and river in the state of California. So this is the model. And so that's the neat thing about it, is if we can accomplish something here, we'll be able to get something done elsewhere. I know LA River and LA County would love to be able to move this, because I know the engineers down there, having been a certified floodplain manager with FEMA, involved in all this stuff at the federal and state level. I met some engineers down there that they would love to be able to implement this in their LA River basin, which if you look at it, it's just a mile and a half wide, but it's dry 99% of the time. But when they have the storms, they need that large of an area to move the water through, otherwise they just flood out everything. So it is an important effort that James is going through on this. But all the above can be done if we can get the right partners together, public and private, to get a plan together that will be an ongoing maintenance situation to where it just does. Now, there's another problem is a lot of this material and sedimentation that is removed does not belong, it belongs to the people, which means the government has control over it. So you have to store it somewhere if you take it out, unless you can, but within this plan, there is a way to make it to where the private industry can come and get it and take it out, and it belongs to them. And this is one of the few, I think there's one other study and program that was done also that James had mentioned to me and I've looked at. And so it's kind of a real, as they call it, sticky wicket, as they call it sometimes, to get there. But this is an opportunity to make it happen. And I'm in full support of James pushing, and he keeps me up. I'm on that committee that he's talking about the sedimentation damage and downstream. And we talk occasionally. He's got a new thing that's happened, but he's not going to talk about yet, of a possibility. And so somebody that may be able to help us remove it and is big enough to actually have some influence with government to get it done in a project. So it's there. We just need to be able to follow through. And James will make sure that happens. And I'm behind him on it.
Thank you. That meeting is tomorrow morning, actually, and it's with a private entity, and not to hide his name or anything, but it's a gentleman that owns a company, and he originally made an offer to Sutter County back in 1998 that said, I will clean out the entire river if I can keep everything I find. And everyone went, wait a second, is there gold in there? And so there was a little bit of, a lot of people at the time said go for it, and this gentleman and I will be meeting tomorrow to discuss our Plan C and Plan D so that we can work towards the privatization, if we've got to privatize this mission to get done. Because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has stated that if our county, our Board of Supervisors decide that, the 5 of them decide that we need to do this within our own county, and we have a private entity that will do it, then we can bypass everybody if we can get the permitting process done. So that's why it's important to have the right Board of Supervisors in. So District 3 is open, and we know one guy that's here for District 3 supporting what we're doing here today. That's Bert Manuel. So thank you, Bert. Question?
We're coming to the end of our rainfall runoff producing period this year, and the storage in Oroville is only about 44%. A couple of thousand second feet coming in, and about 2,000 going out. I think that's about the maximum they can get out, because it has to go through the power plant, right?
That's correct. Yes, 14,000 is the maximum.
Yeah. So I think we're going to have less water coming down the Feather River this summer. It's going to be a mud hole, I think, and it's going to be a real problem for fish life, as I see it. Because right now there's only about 1,200,000 acre feet in the reservoir. Would you agree that we're going to have a real problem? I don't see how the state can even maintain the contracts they have. Yuba City may have a problem getting the water they take out for water treatment, for water supply. So what's your opinion on that?
I would say that yes, you're going to see your water bills increase again. I would not be shocked if in Sutter County we get put on water rationings again. I would not be shocked if we're not going to be able to water our lawns at certain times if you live east of the Buttes. If you live west of the Buttes, you're probably drawn from Sacramento River. And since that's a federal water, you're not going to be as affected. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of federal lobbying being done right now on agriculture and metropolitan sides to try to get Trump to have Department of Interior release more water down that system and have the Sacramento River dispersing more water down south, because the state water project is going to be undervalued on how much water we actually have in Oroville. I think I agree with everything you said. The fisheries are heavily in decline. We have the spring Chinook, which once flourished here in our area, and you used to be able to fish for salmon in March, April, and May and June for 4 months. And we had beautiful, bright, big king salmon coming up our rivers, and you could fish for them. They're called springers, and now they're threatened, and now they're closed. We haven't been able to fish for those since 2007. The chances of them ever coming back is collapsing. I could talk to you about fisheries for about 6 of these meetings. But the fishery is in heavy decline. The fall Chinook is in heavy decline. That's our last run left that's used to be huge. It used to be 250,000 of fall run come up the feather just by themselves. I think we're in trouble. If we don't have a miracle March here and a wet April, I think we're going to be in real trouble in the Feather River, because those fish will come back. And what happens is when they get into the lower river and it's only 1 foot to 3 feet, they're going to push because their brain's telling them it's I've got to go. I've got to go breed. I've got to reproduce. That's what their brain tells them. So they're going to push up to these natal waters to where they're from, and it's going to be low. If we have a hot summer, anything over 90 degrees, which we all know we're going to have, it's going to superheat that water. It causes bacterial growth. It causes parasites start to grow. And then the salmon start to get gill rot inside their gills, and they'll start dying. And we've seen that in the drought before. That's just happened in 14 and 15. So it's not something that's uncommon, but it's something that we're going to experience because of the mismanagement of water. I think a lot of people in the Oroville community lobbied hard on DWR to drop that river all the way out. And I've been following it since day one, and I thought it was ridiculous. When you look at simple math, you would have been able to hold that reservoir at 820 feet elevation, consistently releasing 50,000 until the spring melted away. But right, last year I meant. Right. Last year is what I meant from snow melt. So yeah, so this year we don't have that much snow melt. We just got a couple of nice storms. And so they're going to do their impact survey. I think their next one comes up on March 15th, when DWR will go up there and stick the stake and tell you how much snow melt we have. But I think the community of Oroville, I also guide on Oroville Lake for trout and salmon and bass. In Oroville Lake, the problem with them up there is their economical impact is even superseding ours now, because now the lake's affected. I didn't have anyone that wanted to go fish there last year. People don't even want to be near that reservoir. They're scared of it. It's like it's got a cloud over it now, and that's affecting the recreation there, especially because all of the ramps, you have to have 730 feet elevation to access the recreation and the ramps. And all the houseboat owners that are up there, many live in our community, can't even get their houseboat to and from their houseboats. And this whole summer, it's going to affect them. Some of them had to pull their houseboats because if they didn't pull them in time, they would never be able to yank them off the lake. And that's expensive. So there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. This is not just a one-year deal. And I think that a lot of people, when we all came back to our homes, everyone went, whew, that was a close one. We're lucky. We're alive. We're good. Yes, we are, and that's great. And that is our number one concern, all of us, with safety, public safety. Worry about people first and then property. But the problem is that we're going to see a chain reaction domino effect because of the spillway crisis. And I predict it's going to affect all 3 of these counties' communities for at least 5 years minimum. And if we don't get the sediment cleaned up here in the next couple of years, we could be seeing a catastrophic event, such as all the salmon die. There's so much turbidity and so much sand down there now. I mean, it's amazing when you're out there and you physically see it. I can show you guys all more photos. I'm sure you saw some of them.
Hey, James.
Sir.
My question's twofold. It's been a revolving door of people running DWR. The last meeting I went to up in Gridley at the hospital, James was going to go meet, the other James was going to go meet with him. Have you guys met with him? And did you get any response from the new head of DWR?
Good question. Yes, it seems that it's been a revolving door at DWR, and it seems that of the top positions, more than 50% of the people have now exited in retirement after the Oroville spillway crisis. Since then, since the original director left, they filled in a part-time director, was a full-time director, and he has since left and gone back to Sonoma County. And now the new head is Carla, and she is the head of DWR. We have a meeting scheduled for her with our organization in March, in the middle of March. Gallagher has met with her. Gallagher has expressed our community's concerns, and they are noted in her mind, but it has not been a priority. And I guess I'll leave it at that for right now until I physically get to talk to her and express our concerns as a community, because I think that politically it sometimes comes better when you hear it from your constituents directly.
My other question is, being a rice farmer, I kind of rely on water. I think the mismanagement with DWR is immense, because they're telling us we're going to have full allocation of our water this year, which is predicated on 600,000 acre feet coming into the lake. But also too, there's a 2-year cycle in there, and we met last year's requirement. And so if there's only about 450,000, we'll meet the 2-year requirement. So when he touched on the river's going to be low, I don't think the river's going to be that low, because I think we're going to get our water. But at the end of the year, I don't think they're going to be able to pull any water out of the dam. I think if DWR was prudent, now don't get me wrong, I don't want to plant half my rice crop, but I think they need to curtail us and give us 50% cutback, because what if we do go into a 3-year drought cycle or a 2-year drought cycle? It just seems like the management at DWR is inept at almost everything they do. And the other thing is, I want to tell you, you're doing a yeoman's work. You did a great job raising money. I saw your Facebook page about raising money to help clean up the Feather River. So I want to give you $100 tonight to help with that. You're an asset to our community, and thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Yeah, that campaign that we're doing on Facebook right now is we're heavily engaged with cleaning up the homeless, and that's kind of a whole nother hot topic. They have been destroying our community down below in the river basins for many, many, many years, and our government on the Yuba County side kicked them out. They're now being sued by the homeless mayor, who's an attorney, and there's a lawsuit on the city of Marysville for kicking them out. And so then they came into Yuba City, and they lived in the riverbanks of Yuba City. Yuba City then kicked them out, and they went into the county. And now we have estimated 2,500 to 3,000 people living in the river bottoms between Yuba City Boat Ramp and Shanghai Falls. And that area is completely and utterly destroyed. Last year I pulled over and parked my boat on the embankment, and a lady needed to use the restroom that was on my boat, and she started walking up the hill, and a pit bull came charging out of the bushes and almost attacked her. That's a problem. Now, I don't want to get into any type of debate about homeless. I believe that there are a lot of good people that have bad times, and I'd love to give a hand up to those types of people, not a handout, but a hand up, and help those types of people. But the problem is that Dale Whitmore, Board of Soups in Yuba County, did a petition poll with Habitat for Humanity and found that 70%, it was actually 72% of all the people living in the river bottom said, we want to live here. This is where we want to live. We don't want to leave. In the Sutter County side, our sheriff has refused to engage. But yet, if anyone in this room goes down there and we go all down there tonight and go light a bonfire down there and we're there, we can all get arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. Because right now it says day use only on county property. You are not allowed to camp, no overnight camping. Yet they've been living down there for years. They're growing dope down there. They are doing drugs. There's a lot of stolen merchandise. There's aerial photos on our Facebook page that show you how dirty and nasty it really is. And it is now affecting the river system. There's pumps. They have huge pumps pumping 2.5-inch hose lines coming up the embankment to their own communities. And they have water going into their makeshift toilets and draining their sewage into our river. And nobody's doing anything about it. It's just sight unseen. And the only one to complain, I mean, there's been a lot of complaints, but the only people to complain are the people that are down there daily, which is us sportsmen. It's not only an unsafe place, it's a place that needs to get cleaned up. And so we're trying to organize a cleanup at the end of March. So thank you, Bert. I appreciate that. Bill?
Hello. James, thank you for being here
Thank you.
tonight. I'm not going to